So here we are. I guess I am live streaming now on OBS, and I've got this is great. So this is my first live stream, and I've got this in this hall. I'm sure this is the way a lot of people's first live streams go. So today we're going to talk about this next property, a CSS property. And if you missed out on the last video, which as of the time of this recording has not actually been published, so there's no way you would have seen it if you're watching this live, we went over the -- property. It's kind of meta because this is going to be CSS A to Z. And the -- property, of course, is custom properties. And we talked through everything related to custom properties that we could get through. Even talked about some of the idiosyncrasies of how hoisting doesn't work with CSS, where you might expect it to work in another language, for example. So today we're talking about align content. This is our first A in this series. Align content. We actually have two align contents here. We're going to talk about both of them, although we're probably going to focus on the one that is in the CR stage. That's the current recommendation. And the reason for that is because the WD stage, this is the working draft, right? So it's gone through the editor's draft. It's gone through the first public working draft. Now it's in working draft status. The candidate recommendation, CR means candidate recommendation. That is where the other align content is. And it makes sense to know both of these, or to think about both of them and to know how they work. All right, so both of these are a part of Flexbox. All right, so what is Flexbox? Let's do some live Googling here. Flexbox. All right, so if you don't know about CSS tricks, highly recommend you go and check this out. This video series could never replace the vast amount of content that is on csstricks.com, but this is a complete guide to Flexbox. All right, if you want to learn about Flexbox as a kind of conceptually all together, this would be a good place to do it. But the long story short here, and this goes into a lot of details, including, by the way, align content. There we go. There's a preview of what we're going to be talking about today. But the concept of Flexbox. All right, let's rewind to pre-Flexbox, which is when I learned CSS. There seems to be kind of three entry-level schools of thought, maybe four, if you count pre-CSS days. CSS being applying styles outside of the markup itself. So it started out with markup, pure markup, that could be styled with inline styles, right? This is style equals on your div tag. Right. And this worked for a long time because people were not creating vast numbers of web pages. Most pages were static. They were just being served directly. But then people wanted to start making more kind of transferable styles, because the very clear reason why you want CSS, one of the most obvious ones, would be so you can apply the same style to two different elements without having to copy all of that style information. Let's say you had 20 attributes on a particular tag. You probably shouldn't, but let's say you did. Well, you wouldn't want to have to copy all of that and then try to keep those two in sync. That's where things really break down. It wouldn't be too hard to copy it once, but then once you change one over here and you expect this one to look the same as this one, well, now you have to do a bunch of kind of syncing back and forth. It's just not fun, right? So CSS eliminated this problem by externalizing that information and saying, okay, you can use something like a tag selector, or you can use a class or an ID. Really a lot of ways that you can select the items in your DOM over here and then apply these styles. So you can, apply one set of styles to thousands of the same types of elements, or thousands of different types of elements. All right, this is super powerful, right? Because we can take these things and combine them. So that was the second stage, is when we went from kind of elements having inline styles applied to them, and then it went to elements having external styles applied. And during this stage, we had table layout. Table layout was very prevalent in the very early time of the web, and then it very quickly was replaced. Kind of tables were phased out and were replaced by CSS-based alignment or CSS-based positioning. Tables still have their place. In fact, we're looking at a table right now. If we inspect this, we can see this is absolutely a table, right? There's a table right there, the head, the body, etc. The reason for this is because this is tabular data. It makes sense to have this in a table because it's a table of data. But what people were doing at the time was they were using a table for this whole thing, right? For everything on the page, for their headers, for their images, everything was contained in a table, and you had to think in terms of tables. This didn't make a lot of sense, so we went to kind of this page-based thinking. Page-based thinking is very simply where you take imagine a printed out piece of paper. And on that printed out piece of paper, you've laid out text, you've laid out images, etc. And all of those things have very fixed positions, fixed sizes, and then you encode that in your CSS. Or you could do this with tables, but it's a whole lot easier with things like divs and positioning, particularly thinking about position like block positioning or inline positioning or inline block positioning, floating left. If you're familiar with these terms, then you probably learned CSS around that time. And this was a really important step, right? Because the box model of the browser was essentially established with this thinking. And this has a lot of relation to printing, right? A lot of relation to printing. Because a lot of the layout that we did at the time was fixed layout. In other words, it would be pixel perfect. Down to the actual pixel, we could measure exactly what we wanted. All right, so obviously this breaks down pretty quickly because we have different screen sizes. We have different requirements based on how large your browser is or how small your browser is. We have dynamic content, and we want to change the size and layout of things based on those restraints. And we don't necessarily want to have a specific pixel width size or pixel height size. All of that kind of went out the window very quickly, and we solved some of this by using percentages, for example, right? We used we'll call this, phase 3.5 maybe. We used, media queries, etc. All right, cool. So some of this has been solved. We changed the fixed width to multiple fixed widths, or we change it to percentage based, but we still don't have quite the responsive layout that we want. There's a lot of fiddly, kind of hacky things that we had to do to get the layout right. And it still is requiring a lot of kind of granular control over things that we really don't care about. Ultimately, we just want it to look pretty good, right? We want these things to kind of lay out together on their own. Because computers are smart. Computers should be able to take rules rather than declared measurements. They should be able to take rules and apply those rules to the different content that we have to lay it out. All right, and that's where we come to Flexbox. Flexbox does allow you to set up these rules, right? And not just Flexbox, but also a few other specs in CSS that we're going to talk about eventually, like grid, for example. But Flexbox allows you to take various types of rules and apply them across multiple elements. And then Flexbox will determine, based on the contents of those elements, and based on those rules, is going to combine those things and decide what the layout should be. Okay, cool. So what does that mean in practice, right? Well, we'll do a very quick, and we're getting into the F property here, but bear with me. We're going to set up a flex class. Display is flex, and we're going to do div.flex, and I'll just show you kind of the difference and some automatic behavior that we have in flex, all right? So we're going to have let's see. Let's do 3 paragraphs. Oops. Maybe I don't have that expansion yet. Okay. We'll just do it like this. All right. And we're going to copy and paste this 3 times. Cool. And then we're going to have just a regular div that has the same content without the class flex, because we don't want to display flex. All right, so the first thing that you're going to notice is that the first one that doesn't have the flex, display flex on it, lays these out in vertical order, or it lays them out in display block. All right. The second one, the flex content, is going to lay these out side by side. There's no floating necessary. There's basically, we're looking at these 3 blocks of content, and the default for flex is to align things horizontally to itself. Okay. So let's make this a little more visual so we can see a little bit more about what's going on. We're going to change the background of this to lime. All right, so this is a full width content here. Then we're going to change all paragraphs to have a background of orange. Okay, so we see these first 3, the width is full width. And then we see the flex one, the width is kind of defined by the content itself. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, what if we did this? What if we said width is 100%? So now we have some interesting things going on. These are unchanged because their width is already 100%. But now we have these flex items, and what flex is understanding when we say width is 100% is it's going to allocate 100% of the available width based on its neighbors, all right? Based on the neighboring pieces of the puzzle. Sorry, my phone has a little alarm going off. So right here we have 3 things. Their available width being 100% default flex behavior. The available width is whatever the share is, right? It's allocating 33.3 infinity % to each of these so that it's equally distanced for all of them. So 100% is going to be exactly that. It's going to be 100% of the available width, right? That's one example of how flex works, right? There's a lot more to cover with this, and we're not going to get to it all. So I want to talk with you today about align content. All right, so let's look at this. Let's look at, this is the flexible box layout. I'm so used to saying flexbox. CSS flexible box layout module level 1. This was proposed in 2018, as opposed, by the way, to this CSS box alignment module level 3, which is still in working draft, proposed in April of last year. Okay. So let's go back to the box layout module level 1, and we're going to look at align content. So let's jump to the align content property. And here we can see the various types of values. It's going to have flex start, flex end, center, space between, space around, stretch, etc. All right. And we're going to just read over this real quick. The align content property aligns a flex container's lines within the flex container when there is extra space in the cross axis, similar to how justify content aligns individual items within the main axis. Note this property has no effect on single line flex container. Values have the following meanings, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, we can actually see a really nice visual here, right? This is why reading the spec actually helps, but here we can see, okay, so only multi-line flex containers ever have free space in the cross-axis for lines to be aligned, because in single-line flex containers, the sole line automatically stretches to fill the space. That's what we just saw. That's what we just saw, right? This is a single-line flex container. Only one line of content, okay? So if these break, if we were to, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second, but if we break these, then what we have is a cross axis. Okay, what does that mean? Let's go back here. The axis that we're talking about here, we have a main axis and we have a cross axis in Flexbox. A main axis is going to be the left to right in this particular, and that's the default, right? The default is left to right main axis. Horizontal, I guess, is the better term for that. The default cross-axis is the vertical axis, okay? If you were to change your flex direction, okay, that's which direction are we flexing? Or we're going to flex column, that's vertical, then your main axis changes to vertical, and your cross-axis is horizontal. Does that make sense? All right. Cool. So we have this idea of a cross-axis. We have the idea of a main axis, and align content is talking about the cross-axis. Okay? Align content is talking about the cross-axis. So in this case, align content won't do anything. Right? Let's test that theory. Align content center. What's that going to do? Nothing. It does nothing. In fact, if we were to take any of these values, let's take, I don't know, space around. Space around. Let's see what that does. It does nothing, right? Why is that? Well, because we only have one item in our flex container. Flex container is the div, by the way, that has the class of flex, okay? Not one item, one axis, one line, right? These three items are stretched across one line. Okay, well, how can we break it so that we see multiple lines? Let's see. 100 VW, would that do it? Nope. See, flex overrides our sizing. So we got to do something else, right? How do we size items in flex? So what we can do here is we can say there's a flex. Oh, wait. We're on the wrong spec. Here, I'm going to put these next to each other for a second. Flex container baselines. Oh, let's see. Flex wrap. Flex wrap. Here we go. All right, so we want to wrap our content. Oops. Flex wrap. Okay, now we have our 100 VW actually applying. So what happens if we say 75%? We get the same thing. What happens if we say 35%? See, now we can start to see how flex works, right? What we're saying here, or what we're seeing here, is that the width is applying to the item, and then if it goes over the edge, like you would expect, it's going to wrap based on our flex wrap rule here, okay? All right, so we want to get to this align content. We're going to talk about that in a second, but let's change this back to 100% so that we're seeing all of these kind of drop down. And I'm gonna delete the non-flex for now. And what I want to do, I want to set the height of this flex container so we can see how these are actually going to interact. All right, so height, I'm going to set it to 400 pixels, which should be, yeah, there we go. All right, so, and we can already kind of see what's going on here, but before we get started on that, I want to zero out the margin on this so there's no, and also zero out the padding if there's any padding. Basically, I want to see how these things are interacting without align content, right? Without align content, there they go. These are getting stretched out on this secondary axis, okay? In other words, this paragraph's height is going to be set to 1/3 of the flex container's height, all right? Because there's three items, it's going to split the height between the three of them. Okay, cool. So let's see. Let's look at our align content. And let's try a few of these out. So flex start. Where do we want to align the content? We want to align it at the start. All right. So again, remember, align content applies to the vertical axis in this case. So if we align content at flex start, there we go. It's aligning them at the top. All right. So what is the default? I wonder. Let's see. The default, the initial value is stretch. So that means let's go back. Let's say stretch. It's going to stretch these items across that axis. Cool. So that makes sense. So now let's see. Let's align them to flex end. And before I do it, ask yourself, what do you think is going to happen? I think it's going to line them up at the bottom. There we go. And it does. And this makes sense, right? Because once again, align content is dealing with this vertical axis, and flex end on that axis, if the top is the start, then the bottom is going to be the end, right? Flex end is going to put them at the bottom. All right, then we have some other kind of cool ones. Center, what do you think center is going to do? Well, there's a couple things it could do, right? One might be that it'll put one at the very top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. Or it could be that they are equally spaced top to bottom. But actually what happens, I happen to know this one, it's going to put these three the same way that they're stacked right now at the end and the same way they were stacked at the beginning. It's going to stack them, but it's going to stack them in the middle, right? So that the center one is actually in the center. All right, so let's look at that. There it goes. All right, so we've got these three that are aligned vertically in the center. If you've ever wondered, by the way, how to align something in the center of your page or of a thing, right? This is one way to do it. You can also align the text like this, and now you actually have something that's truly center aligned. All right, we're not going to do that right now, though. Okay, let's see. What does space between do? Let's find out. And you could probably remember what we were just talking about, the other options. Space between puts space between. Just turns out that space between just puts space between. All right, that's easy. Space around. Okay, if this one is space between, then what is space around? We kind of already talked about this option. There's space around. So we put space around all of them, including the first and the last items. So there's space on the top and on the bottom, and then on the top and on the bottom, and then on the top and on the bottom. Easy enough. And then finally back to stretch, which is our default option, which is going to stretch these vertically. Okay, cool. So this is how align content works. The key critical factors to remember is, number one, align content is in the secondary axis. All right, so let's look at the what we were just talking about here. We're going to remove this width of 100%, and we're going to remove the flex wrap for a second. All right, and we're also going to remove the height here for just a minute. And now we want to do flex direction column. So what this should do, it gives us these as a column, and very similar to what we were talking about before. All right, so now what we want, let's see, let's change this width to 400%, or let's do like 700 pixels since we have more width here to work with. Okay, cool. So we've got these, in fact, we're going to go even higher, or 1200 pixels. That should do much better. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to try those same align content tricks that we were just doing. All right. What is that going to do? It's not doing anything. Why is that? Let's see. Align content property aligns flex containers aligns within the flex container when there's an extra space in the cross axis, similar to how justify content aligns individual items within the main axis. Okay, so here's what's happening. All right, so the question, first of all, the question should be, what did you expect to happen? Well, right now, our main axis is the vertical axis. Right, our main axis is the vertical axis. So what that means is this is a single line container. That's what it's talking about here. Okay, single line flex container. This property has no effect on a single line flex container. As it turns out, this is a single line flex container. So what do we do here to get this thing to actually do something with these? Well, one way, I think, is to look at the flex columns. So column count, I think. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to have to Google it now. Column count flex box. Here we go. Column count, as it turns out. Okay, cool. So let's see. Let's apply. Let's remove this align content. Let's see what column count 3 does. Does it do anything? Oh no, because this is going to be wrapping of flex items. Let's see. Flex flow might be row wrap or column wrap. Let's see what that does. Okay, so now we have a flex direction. Let's see. Let's make sure that that's not changing. Okay. Oh man, this is what happens when you try to code live, right? Flex spaces, 160 pixels. Okay. Oops. Okay, so it should be new columns if, so we need to restrict the height here. That's what's happening. Okay, so let's change the height of this pixel, or of these paragraphs. So we'll do height 300 pixels, let's say, all right? So now we should have a height on this flex of, let's say we put that at 300 pixels as well. Okay, now, now our columns are wrapping into new columns. See that? All right, cool. So right now also our align content should be set to stretch. And it is. So, and these are tall because they're 300 pixels, but they're wide. They fill up this left to right space because of align content stretch. Now, what do you think is going to happen if we say align content start? There we go. So our 300 pixel high paragraphs are being moved along the secondary axis, not the primary one, but the cross axis, as they call it in the spec. They're being moved over to the start of that cross axis, okay? Because our primary axis, once again, is vertical in this case. All right, cool. So then what happens if we do, let's say, space around, all of those previous values that we had, they're going to apply as we would expect, just in this axis instead of the instead of the other axis, all right? So there are a lot of places where this is useful, okay? Most of the time, you're going to see this kind of layout. The reason this felt a little bit weird to get through is because this kind of layout left to right is typically done on that primary axis. We're going to use something like justify content rather than align content for that. And then typically, you're going to see something that is vertical done with align content, since that's the cross axis most of the time. But it's not always true. It's just so happens to be the default, right? So that's why it feels a little bit weird to see it like this with these particular attributes. Okay, so we've gone through this first kind of level 1 or box layout module level 1, the recommendation from 2018. Let's look at, how does align content differ, okay, as it relates to the newest spec from 2020. Aligning a box contents within itself, content distribution, align content and justify content, which we were just talking about, right? Let's see. So we have new value types, right? Okay, normal is new, right? That's the initial value. Baseline position, content distribution, overflow position, and content position. These, what this line means here in the middle, let's take a look here. Content distribution could be what we've already talked about with some of these, space between, space around. You may have noticed that this space evenly may have been something that you wanted before. All right, let's look at that for a second on the old spec. Okay, we're going to go back to our previous style here. We're going to change this paragraph. We're going to say height. We wanted to do width. And our width of the paragraph was 100%, so we can see these things wrap, right? We want to do flex wrap. We'll set that to wrap. Okay, so now, actually we wanted our height to be 400 pixels. That's what I missed. Cool. Okay, so then, so if you look at the space around, you can see that the space above this top one is smaller. In fact, it's half of the space between the top one and the second one. All right, and if you're like me, you probably want whatever that space is to be equal to this space. You want to move this one down a little bit or whatever it is that you need to do to make them equal, right? It's kind of weird that, you know, we see this problem a lot with collapsing margins and that kind of stuff. So we see the double the space between here and here, and then the same space at the end and at the start. So you might be tempted to add some margin or something, but it's hard because you don't know exactly how much margin because these are all calculated on the fly by Flexbox. It's kind of the point. So the new spec has this nice little space evenly. Okay. And I don't think this is going to work. Let's find out. Oh, it does. Look at that. So space evenly, the new spec has been implemented, it looks like, in Chrome to allow this even spacing between the items. All right, so that's very simple concept. Stretch is the same. Okay, so let's go back. What is so that's our content distribution. What's our overflow position? Safe and unsafe. All right, safe is the size of the alignment subject overflows the alignment container. The alignment subject is instead aligned as if the alignment mode were start. If the size of the alignment subject overflows the alignment container, the alignment subject is instead aligned as if the alignment mode were start. Okay, so you can see this here is the way that you can imagine this working out. We have the safe over here and the unsafe. All right, on the left, if it overflows, sorry, let's just read this for a second, in which if the container was placed against the left edge of the page, safe behavior would be more desirable as the long item would be fully readable rather than clipped by the left edge of the screen. All right, so the idea is maybe the screen is going to cut off here. Well, now you can't see any of this side of this content. So instead, we're going to align it, just offset this way. Okay, so that makes sense. We're going to have, multiple ways to align our content. Let's go back to where we were here. Okay, overflow position. Oh, wait, that's not it. Align content, baseline content distribution, baseline position. Baseline position is going to talk about. So there's all of these different things that you can add, right, to this one property. That's the thing about this property, is that it's got a lot of modifiers that you can use, and it just it is important that you understand each of them for your use case and imagine, okay, I want this thing, and here's what I've learned about Flexbox. I want this thing, and it seems like it should exist, and I'm going to go read the spec to find out if it exists, right? So in this case, for example, right, and it doesn't make sense for us to go through every piece of this because the combinations, there's a lot of them. All right, but let's look at this. So baseline alignment is a form of positional alignment that aligns multiple alignment subjects within a shared alignment context, such as cells within a row, by matching up their alignment baselines. If the position of the alignment subjects with the baseline sharing group is not fully constrained by baseline alignment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what does this actually mean? So maybe this means that the baseline is changed by this. Okay. This might be something that we have to cover on its own in the B section of the A to Z. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of baselines, it looks like, right? And people who have done any typography know about this. We have baseline shift between different character types, for example. So there is probably some more going on here than we're going to be able to cover in a single video. Okay. Baseline position, content distribution, we've already gone over that. Overflow position. Okay, what will an overflow? Oh, we already talked about that as well. Safe and unsafe. And then content position, center, start, end, flex, start, flex, end. These are going to be different ways that the types of content can be positioned. Okay. That's a lot, right? This is a lot. And part of the reason why this feels a little bit more dense than our level 1, right? This is level 3. Remember, it's new. It's in working draft mode. That's part of the reason why it feels a little more dense, okay? Flexbox 1, this layout module level 1 has been around for a while. And whether that's because we kind of have the working language or because the level 3 hasn't been totally refined to be easily understood by the average developer like myself, in either case, Flexbox 1 is a little bit easier to understand. With that said, being aware, right, that this one is out there, that you're going to have some new properties that are coming out for Flexbox. Okay, not this one, sorry. This one. That these, this working draft eventually is going to come down. All right, let's go look at Can I Use to see who has actually done anything with this yet. Okay, box alignment module level 3. Let's see. And you can see there's even some hand-drawn things in here. We can see that. This is what's cool about the spec. We can see actually this is somebody sitting around, probably at dinner, and trying to decide how things should work. And they're drawing this up. I would imagine this is probably Tab Atkins that's drawing that. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, and I'm not even sure how much of this, if any of it, has been implemented in any particular browser other than the equal space that we saw. Maybe I missed something and equal is in here somewhere. Space equally. Let's see. Maybe that will tell us if we go to Can I Use. Let's find out if space equally is in there. Nope, it's not. So this is not an exact science, is what we should be kind of taking away from this, right? Who knows? Where does space evenly work? All right, that's a difficult question to answer. All right, let's see. What if we Googled that? Justify content, space evenly. It's not in the official released. Let's see, space evenly. Saying it's not in the official spec, right? It's not in this official spec, but in a lot of these tools, if we were to look at Flexbox here, space evenly, this is in here, right? It's in the CSS tricks guide. This is what's very interesting about CSS, okay? Or one of the things that's interesting about CSS. Of course, it's very powerful, has a long history, a very interesting history, sometimes some conflicted history. But what's so interesting about it now is that even though we have a lot of browsers that are pushing things forward, not everything is going to be perfectly cut and dry, right? What is supported where? Well, it's not perfectly cut and dry. It's hard to answer that question. And on top of that, sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Sometimes, who knows if space equally is going to actually be supported in the browser that you're using. You might have to do a little bit of testing to figure that out. But if you go and you look at these specs, you're going to find kind of the etymology, how things grew to be where they are today, and a lot of the rationale behind how it works, right? For example, understanding Flexbox at its core is based on these two axes, right? That primary axis and then that secondary axis, or they called it the cross axis. That helps you understand Flexbox so much more than if you were to just try to learn all of the attributes and throw them together until you see something that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm excited to do more of these, and hopefully it'll be useful and I won't be Googling as much next time. But I do think there's some value in learning how you can understand the stuff, wrap your head around it, even if it's, what should you Google? In this case, I failed to find some of the information that I wanted. Maybe I can update on the next video around. Thanks so much.